He tried to be very threatening and very frightening, but I wasn't frightened by him. I found him interesting.
The controversies that followed the release of Straw Dogs is a thing of legend, as there was a major outrage across different countries because of this one movie. What got everyone's attention was that one scene that involved Susan George, which many claimed broke too many moral codes at the time. Despite the movie shooting Susan George into fame, it almost harmed her career, as she had to make conscious efforts to distance herself from playing such roles ever again. So what was this in this movie that was so despicable, to the point of being banned in some countries? Well, let's find out. But first, let's take a look at how Susan got caught in the middle of it all. Susan George is a seasoned British actress born in Surrey, England on July 26, 1950. Since an early age, George showed an innate talent for the performing arts, encouraged by her family. Her father was a theatrical agent who played a great role in her interest in acting. These initial exposures towards the realm of entertainment formed the foundation on which her successful film and television career would come to stand. George started acting as a little girl. Her first appearance on screen happened when she was barely 4 years old, and she showed her promising talent right away. During her teens, she was ever present in most of the British series, such as Orlando and The Saint. That gave her lots of experience and allowed her to learn even more about her profession. That charisma in her teens and undeniable talent soon drew the attention of casting directors and producers, thus opening even bigger doors. In the late 1960s, George began making her transition from television to film, which became a very prolific film career. One of her first major film roles was a 1967 psychological horror film, The Sorcerers, by Michael Reeves. The picture did not have major box office success, however, it proved that George could handle complex, intense roles, a fact that helped her to gain recognition within the industry and open her up to more substantial parts. Her breakthrough came in the British-Italian co-production Twinkie in 1970, directed by Richard Donner, where she played the title role of Twinkie, a young girl falling in love with an older American writer. She was both adorable and subtle as Twinkie, which earned her critical acclaim and established her as one of the brightest new stars in British cinema. The film's success brought her international attention and offers from Hollywood. Being cast by Sam Peckinpah in the provocative thriller Straw Dogs back in 1971 has been among those important instances throughout her early career. Intense and raw violence were showcased via the storyline and characters. She plays Amy Sumner, the young wife of the movie's central protagonist, David Sumner. This role called for her to portray a gamut of emotions, from vulnerability to strength, and George did just that with a spectacular performance that has left an indelible mark on audiences and critics alike. The casting for Straw Dogs was quite elaborate, and Peckinpah was notorious for his detailed casting processes. What probably worked in George's favor was how she could bring to the fore the layers in Amy's character. Peckinpah was taken by her ease on screen and the way she handled some of the most difficult and emotionally taxing scenes in the film. Also, she had great chemistry with Hoffman, which was integral to the development of the movie's plot. Straw Dogs marked a turn in George's career, bringing her a great deal of recognition and establishing her as one of the leading actresses in both British and American cinema. Success with the film brought in more high-profile roles, including her performance in the high-octane action film Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry in 1974, further showcasing her versatility as an actress. In the movie, George played Mary Coombs, a fun-loving, adventurous woman who unwittingly got tangled up with two small-town thieves involved in a very intense chase. She infused Mary with confidence and unbridled temerity. Throughout the decade, George perpetuated her progress with a whole spate of unusual and challenging work. She had her appearances in several films such as Sonny and Jed, a spaghetti western directed by Sergio Corbucci in 1972, and Mandingo in 1975, the antebellum controversial drama set in the South. She had led roles through which she had opened herself toward developing different angles within her as an actor, ranging from action and adventure to dramatic and romantic movies. Her seriousness with work and ability to stick to the skin of the characters made her one of the busiest actresses in the industry. In addition to these film roles, George was extremely active television during this period. She had a lead in The Adventurer, a British series which ran from 1972 to 1973. She guest starred in both The Persuaders and The Protectors. These roles showed her versatility as an actress and continued placing her in the limelight in both film and television. From a very tender age, Susan George was fully committed to excellence and pursued an acting career avidly. Born of humble origins in Surrey, the international film star always delivered on her talent. Some of her earlier starring roles were examples of not only how capable of a performer she was, but also left indelible marks on the silver screen. Susan George succeeded in winning the love and respect of many in this sphere, treating the audience with a great number of performances. However, Susan George's role in Straw Dogs was one that came with far more emotional and psychological baggage than she or anybody else involved with the production could have anticipated. Directed by Sam Peckinpah, this was a brutal exploration of human nature, violence, and masculinity set against the backdrop of a remote Cornish village. The film by Peckinpah required raw and honest performances from his actors. The result was a movie captivating and impactful, but meant an enormous amount of tension on the cast, and George in particular, who needed to portray Amy Sumner, who receives almost continuous emotional and physical traumas within this movie. Peckinpah was known as an intense director. His search for authenticity meant that he put the actors through considerable tension and uncomfortable situations, bringing out performances that they never thought existed within them. In the case of Straw Dogs, he wanted an authentic and damaged character, and induced location improvisation in the performance among the cast. This system was tough for George, who needed to carry huge emotional luggage around her character, Amy. Amy is a young woman torn between her American husband, David Sumner, played by Dustin Hoffman, and the simmering hostility of the local men in the village. Peckinpah's penchant for realism placed George in a position where she had to be deeply submerged into the psychological and emotional turmoil her character had to endure, including being at the center of one of cinema's most contentious scenes, the double Amy. The Straw Dogs scene was highly controversial upon its release and became a point of debate. This is a very raw and disturbing scene in which Amy is first attacked by her former lover, Charlie Venner, played by Del Henney, and then by one of Venner's cohorts, Norman Scott, played by Ken Hutchison. But what really made this scene so divisive was the way in which Amy's response was portrayed ambiguously. At one point, it even seems that Amy returns the favor, a scene that inspired some seriously violent criticism and charges of misogyny. Peckinpah himself called the scene the poetic explanation of the ambiguity of human emotions and the manipulations in those kinds of relations. For most viewers and critics, it was a dramatization of. The outrage was immediate and overwhelming. The controversy with the rape scene was magnified by the broader cultural context of the early 1970s. The feminist movement was in full stride, and themes of gender inequality and women's rights were much at the forefront of public discussions. Many of the feminist organizations condemned Straw Dogs, basing that judgment on their treatment of Amy and the general exploitation of Susan George. The perceived projection by these groups was injurious stereotypes about females and trivialized trauma of rape. Well-known feminist critics such as Molly Haskell condemned the film for senseless violence and for not depicting the post-rape trauma in Amy's character. Other voices of dissent, apart from the feminist factions, were organizations and individuals. It is for this reason that religious groups lashed out at the graphic nature and the morality of the film, and critics at the time also termed Peckinpah as a sensationalist for using violence as a narrative point. the unflinching brutality within the film, and the morally ambivalent ending where David Sumner embraces his violent instincts to protect his home, further fueled the backlash. Many claimed that it glorified violence and gave no moral end to the scenarios depicted, which left audiences disturbed and upset. This outburst had major reparations for Straw Dogs. It was therefore banned and restricted in various countries according to decisions of censors who found it too graphic to be viewed by the general audience. Originally released in Great Britain, it was refused a certificate by the British Board of Film Classification, which virtually banned the film from the cinemas. The complete release of the film in the UK did not come until 2002, after heavy cuts and debates. Meanwhile, the X rating seriously hampered access to and commercial opportunities for the film in the United States. Ireland and Norway banned the film outright, but major edits had to be allowed in countries whose censors called for a reduction in excessive violence and scenes of explicit sexuality. Despite the scandal, Straw Dogs remained a vivid and influential piece of film history. The relentless Peckinpah, as well as the brave George, is still reassessed to this very day due to the way violence and human nature are conveyed, which are more multifaceted and thought-provoking than previously thought. Its legacy is, however, irreconcilably tied up with the debate the film ushered in concerning screen violence, particularly sexual violence. For Susan George, the role of Amy Sumner was career-defining but deeply challenging. The emotional burden of filming such intense scenes was huge, and later she spoke about how hard it was to get herself out of the trauma her character went through. Yet, beyond the violence, George's performance in Straw Dogs was quite spectacular, earning her widespread recognition and respect within the industry for her remarkable talent and versatility as an actress. The years since the release of Straw Dogs have continued to incite discussion and debate about the film. The violence, along with a few other primary human predispositions in their candid exhibition, eventually made it the subject of several academic deliberations and cultural critiques. While much of that controversy has not dissipated, with the scene being central, it entwines with the major themes of the film, of violence and masculinity, now seen as a bold move, considered to have dared audiences into uncomfortable truths pertinent to human nature. For Susan George, the movie is a memorial to her professionalism and commitment as an actress, while grimly standing to remind her of the massive emotional and psychological baggage of that role. Susan George, however, has tried to take up more varied roles since after that movie, for fear of typecasting or being defined solely by her controversial performance in the role of Amy Sumner. In the face of this notorious film and the resultant media uproar, which put her life under the spotlight, George worked untiringly to carve a niche in a multitude of roles to show her acting versatility. Whatever she did in films, television, or theaters, Amy threw up a show by playing various kinds of roles and characters in several dimensions, which was fueled by the desire and determination to shatter any mold that her performance in Straw Dogs might have on her. One of her most notable projects in the wake of Straw Dogs' success was her role in the action film Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry in 1974. She would be cast in quite a different role. She would play the energetic, adventurous Mary Coombs, an independent woman teaming up with two criminal fellows involved in a long, country-bound car chase. Coming from the vulnerability and trauma of Amy Sumner, that was considerably different, but she still faced the role with charisma and vigor. She received almost unanimous acclaim, with the film gaining huge attention, sealing her reputation as a versatile actress who did justice to drama and action-oriented roles with the same flair. During the immediate years following Straw Dogs, George once again undertook another huge production, the problematic melodrama Mandingo, set against the antebellum South in 1975. She secured the part of Blanche Maxwell, wife of a plantation owner whose smoldering passions and jealousy led to a tragic end. The role provided George with outstanding emotional territory in which to operate, and she was very powerful, drawing a line pointing to her continued ability with amoral characters. While the film itself was criticized for its graphic nature and how slavery was represented, George's performance was generally regarded as one of the few positives. George did not stop there. She pushed further in television too, where she continued to showcase her versatility as an actress. She starred from 1972 to 1973 in the British series The Adventurer and guest starred in popular series like The Persuaders and The Protectors. These roles allowed her to explore different facets of her craft and reach a broader audience. Apart from her screen works, George took to the stage as well, which showed her adaptability and dedication to her art with even greater vitality. Other than acting, there were a couple of things in which Susan George indulged, some of which reflected the diverse nature of her personality. A good equestrian, fond of horses, she soon turned to horse breeding and horse training as a viable business venture too. Of course, her interest in horses was not all. Being an advocate for animal rights, her works also consisted of major causes against animal torturing and creating awareness for saving endangered species. She was valued and appreciated for her animal-friendly attitude, and once collaborated with principal organizations to forward their causes. Writing and production were also two other fields that George got particularly interested in. She penned books like A Susan George Film Book in 1972, through which one got candid information pertaining to her feelings towards the film world. Through that type of writing about acting, fame, and hard steps to make it big in Hollywood, she was articulate and reflective. Apart from her books, George worked as a producer, accepting projects that she was in control of the story, creatively speaking, which enabled her to tap into her unexplored angles on performance. At the height of the uproar surrounding Straw Dogs, there were few more unlikely apologists for the film and its creators than Susan George herself. While many came out to condemn the film for its violence and rape, George stood by the movie and its creator, Sam Peckinpah. She felt the film was a head-on and very frank exposition about human nature, and that its two most brutal scenes were completely necessary in both telling and imparting the themes of the story. Sam Peckinpah said his point was never to glorify the violence, but to make people think and take one step towards uncomfortable truths. The defense for Straw Dogs spread to co-stars and other creative people discussing the difficult and often punishing creation process, commitment, and professionalism of everyone who participated in the film. George did give support for the film and its makers in her own unconditional manner, all while acknowledging that the film did take its toll on her emotionally. For the people who spoke up for the film, it took a lot of integrity and commitment to the expression of art. George was not a solitary voice in the defense of Straw Dogs. Other actors and personnel within the industry came forward to support the film and its various themes of controversy. Even Dustin Hoffman, playing David Sumner, had a thing or two to say about how the movie treated masculinity and violence as one piece of work that was provocative and needed. He continued, praising Peckinpah's direction and performances of the cast, most notably George's, as courageous and compelling. Other actors, such as Del Henney and Ken Hutchison, who played the parts of rapists, also rose to the film's defense, citing its multidimensional characterization as a work of artistic expression. Beyond the cast of the film, a number of film critics and scholars also rose to Straw Dogs' defense by clamoring that the storyline and production was significantly misunderstood. They cited the subtlety of the violence portrayed in the film and the raw humanness of the expression as proof of the film's artistic merits. Indeed, with time, Straw Dogs has been re-evaluated and is often considered an influential and important film, despite the uproar it caused when first released. The rest of Susan George's career since Straw Dogs had certainly stood in testament to her resolute determination not to be pigeonholed into one role. She has done everything from action films to dramatic television series and has pursued outside interests like animal rights and writing. The instant support she showed to the film Straw Dogs and its makers when it was under so much disrepute with the public spoke volumes about respect for the artist's integrity and how she would stand for no less. Susan George carved a niche for herself in entertainment thanks to her great caliber, versatility, and values. So do you think Straw Dogs would still be controversial if it was released today? Let's hear your thought in the comments, and we will see you in the next one.